What a picture.
Yeah. I watched this last night for the first time in about 25 years. And then this is the second time I've seen it. It's much better with an audience. When you work in film, sometimes you think about films in terms of other milestones in your life. This one, my younger daughter, I have two, and she was born about a month after we finished this movie. She'll be turning 31 in May.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. This movie holds up so well. It's cut like a diamond, I've got to say. It's perfect. How does it feel, like when you're editing a movie, you're watching this footage over and over and over again. Then you don't watch it for 25 years. Now you see it again, and you see how these cuts are hitting and how people are laughing and reacting. And how does that feel?
Yeah, it feels great. I was watching it, especially when I watched it yesterday. I was watching it very critically. And there's not much I would change. There's a couple cuts I would nudge a little bit. But one thing great about this film is the way, the scene transitions. There are these great transitional elements like the woman directing traffic and him getting a massage and so many things, some of which were planned, some of which maybe weren't. And, this was a long time ago, so some of what I say might not be true. I might just be remembering things wrong. But, there are so many nice ways to make those transitions. And a lot of it is just kind of feeling the moment, when does this hit and when is it time to go? And there's not much more I would change, really.
So much of the humor is in the cuts and in the timing of the cuts. From the go, that cut to the sex to the chicken, it's pretty hard.
So you blow into its neck to separate the skin from the meat. That's what that was. That's what, from a culinary standpoint, that's what that's about.
Good to know. Yeah, I made the mistake of not eating dinner before I saw this movie. How did you first meet Ang Lee, and how did you guys start working together?
Well, his first film, Pushing Hands, they were looking for an editor. Ted Hope, who was one of the producers. I had worked on a movie previously with Ted. I was the first film I cut. He was the first assistant director. And so they needed somebody. They couldn't afford to hire a real editor, and I couldn't get hired to cut a real movie. So it all kind of worked out. I said, when I went and met, I said, I don't speak Mandarin. And they said, yeah, we figured do your best. And that's, our first meeting was about as uninteresting as an interview for a job could possibly be. But that was in 1991.
What is that like, cutting in a language you don't understand?
I don't know why it works. I don't know why it works as well as it does. I have a theory that's probably nonsense, that Mandarin being a tonal language, in English, you can encode a lot of subtext in the way you say the word. But since Mandarin's a tonal language, you have less flexibility in how you say the word. So maybe some of the subtext is more encoded in physical things that I can see. That could be complete nonsense, but it might be true. I don't know. It might be partly true. But, when we work together in English, I do the first cut by myself because they're shooting. He was in Taiwan, I was in New York. And I make all the choices about what we're doing myself. And then we sit and work together, and some things change. And they change more when I'm cutting in Mandarin than when I'm cutting in English, but not a lot more. And I can't really tell you why. There's a certain precision in the way that he directs things and the way that what he gets out of actors. There's not a lot of improv and ad-libbing in Ang's films, which helps me a lot. In Mandarin, if they started improving, I'd be out at sea. But no, you just kind of do what feels right, and ultimately a lot of it works out.
And, there's some extraordinary performers in this film. What is it like as an editor, your relationship to the actors you're cutting? I'm thinking it's an amazing cast, but, it's great to see Sheng Lung in this. It's the third of the films he's in, and he's just so perfect on screen.
Yeah, the relationship between editors and actors is as one way as an relationship could possibly be. I often don't meet them at all until we come in to do voice replacement, record additional lines. And sometimes, like on this film, they did that, and I wasn't there for any of that. In fact, I don't think we did any ADR on this, with one exception, which I can tell you about. So sometimes you meet them when you're doing the ADR, as dialogue replacement, and I meet them and say, I've been looking at you all day, every day for 6 months, and you don't know me at all. So it's a funny kind of relationship, but it was great. Hang's first two films, Pushing Hands and Wedding Banquet, were very different from this in that, they were shot in New York on very short schedules, like 19 or 20 some days, which is very tight. This was more than twice that long. And they had time to plan shots really well. That's one of the things I really enjoyed watching this, is remembering how well shot it is, and how carefully the shots are composed, and it's just really well done. And so to have footage with these actors who were maybe a step up from what I had done before, because we were on such a tight schedule, and something so well shot, it was the first time it felt like we were making a real movie in a way. Additionally, Pushing Hands was shot for the Taiwanese market. There was no thought of it being released in the United States when we made that. And then we were debating The Wedding Banquet. It was the same thing. So it was like, we're making movies that, it was a big hit. Pushing Hands was a hit in Taiwan, but I wasn't in Taiwan. I had no knowledge of that, really. They told me, but, I didn't. It didn't affect me in any way. And when we were making Wedding Banquet, it was the same thing. It was like it was a hobby. Not like we were making real movies. And then Wedding Banquet won the grand prize at Berlin. And I was so confused. It's like, oh, it's a real movie? I didn't know. So then this one, this was the first time when it really felt like, we're making an actual movie. And it looked better, and it sounded better, and the performances were better, everything was better. So it was a real treat cutting this one.
Since you mentioned it, what was that one instance of ADR?
Well, the character Raymond, the sleazy boyfriend, he's a good actor, had a great voice, but he had a Cantonese accent, which didn't bother me at all. But it did bother enough of the people watching the movie that we revoiced him. We had another actor come in and completely replace his voice. And in this film, that actor was Ang Lee.
Oh, wow.
So that's Ang's voice
idea.
you hear coming from Raymond.
And I have to ask you about that first sequence. It's frankly, did you know when you were cutting that this is going to kind of become one of the most famous opening sequences?
When you're cutting something, you never know where it's going to wind up. But I knew it was going to be. I knew I was enjoying myself. That was the last thing they shot. That was right at the end of the shoot, and they spent like a week shooting food, because think of all the preparation that goes into getting the shot. It's not like, you put the props back and do it again. It's very complex shooting something like that. So they spent a long time, and some of the people involved in, paying for the movie said, Tim, you got to tell them, knock it off. You got to tell them to stop. And I thought, no, this is great. And with that sequence, the production sound of like cutting that squid open and all that stuff, and slicing the radish, and the sound is so good. And when we initially did the scene, we had no music. We thought, this is really great and really intense. And then our composer did that piece of music because we thought we might want to use it. And it's so good. And we really went back and forth. Do we do the music or not? And we kind of I remember saying, I'm like 51-49 that we should use it. And so we did. And what you want from an opening credit sequence is for people sitting in the audience to, by the end of it, be thinking, okay, I think I'm going to like this movie, And so that's all I was thinking with that sequence, is make it entertaining. And there's all these little cut points, and there's a couple little noises that I put in perfectly with the music, right on beats, right where they belong, right in between moments. It was such great footage to be able to work with, and then to work with that music too. It just came together really nicely.
And then when did you get a sense, later on as the years moved, that it had kind of entered the cultural consciousness?
I think Time or Newsweek magazine, when the film came out, called that the best action scene of the year. Now, tongue in cheek, but still, and the film was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. So I was aware of it being kind of a thing. At the Oscars that year, the host made a joke about Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, that's what Arnold Schwarzenegger said to Maria Shriver on their first date. So, yeah, that was a real, okay, we're making real movies now, and people saw it and liked it, and it did well, so.
I want to take some questions from the audience, so feel free to just throw your hand up. We have a couple mics out there if you have anything. Yeah, over there.
Hi, thank you for being here. I really love this film. I have two questions. So the first one is that we know that there are several characters lines, and I wonder in the editing process, how do you decide when to cut to which character? The second question is that how do you, in the editing process, if you get like different feedbacks, how do you process that feedbacks?
In general, so that enough people can get a questions, and let's stick to one. But
okay.
Yeah. So for the first one, you kind of, in terms of who to cut to when, the interesting scenes here are the dinner table ones, when we're around the dinner table. And you kind of imagine yourself there, and you look at the footage and you think, okay, this person just said that. What does it mean to him? What does it mean to her? What does it mean to her? And where's the most interesting place to look? And you kind of balance that with what did the actors give you? Sometimes something, you think a line means something to this actor, but the actor didn't do anything. So you think, oh, okay, maybe I can steal something from somewhere else, or maybe I can cut to that actor and just the situation will make the audience read into it what I want them to read into it. You just kind of feel your way through the scene and think, what does this mean to each of these people? And ideally, your cuts all feel motivated. Sometimes you cut away from a character because they messed up their next line. Sometimes you cut away because you have to, not because you want to, but they're great up until that moment, and then the take is bad after that. So you go, okay, I have to cut to somebody. So how can I cut to somebody and make it look meaningful? Like I cut there for a reason, not because I was trying to avoid something. So, that's where you go through what the actors did and, sometimes look at their looks. And the big thing to make that work is a good script. Good script and good performances. If you have a good script, you're working in an interesting scene and you can cut around as much as you want and it all looks interesting. And sometimes, there's some scenes in Sense and Sensibility that are cut really fast, but it doesn't feel like they're cut really fast because what's going on is so interesting intellectually and emotionally that you want to look around and check in with everybody because what's being said means something to her and something else to her and something else to him. And so good scripts are what make good editing possible. Good scripts and good performances. And I don't remember the second part.
If you still have the mic, you can,
Yeah.
you can repeat. Your grandfathered in. No single questions after this, but we'll...
Yeah. Oh, feedback. Yeah. When you make a movie, you need to know if things are working. So you have screenings, you have friends and family screenings, and on later films, when we started doing more big American films, we had proper preview audiences where you bring in, 400 strangers and watch the film and they fill out questionnaires and all that. These early films, we had very little feedback. The financiers were all in Taiwan. We showed it to people in New York. At that time, we weren't able to really screen with subtitles. So all the Americans, they would come watch it, and there's nothing much they could say, which was really nice. So we would screen for, Ang would bring some Chinese audiences in, and we'd just see how it played. But, we did these films very fast. We shot in the fall. It was finished by April. From beginning to cut with Ang to locking picture to finishing was only a couple months. So in these films, there just wasn't a lot of feedback. What there was all good, because it's a good movie, There was a little bit, I think, of comments that it seems a little episodic, and that was in the nature of the script and the film. So we just had to try to make that an asset. And some of those transitional things that we did tried to help that. So,
other questions? Over here in the front. Sorry to make you run.
Thank you. Hello. I heard that the kitchen scene actually was shot in New York in the Sheraton Hotel in Flushing. So
no, that's from the wedding banquet.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, this was all shot in Taiwan.
Great. So that's not a question. Could I ask?
Okay, we won't count that one.
Thank you. I have one question, which is, you put the focus on the late mother's picture and kind of like want to bring the audience attention to it. And I noticed that the late mother looked very much alike the second daughter. Is that on purpose? Thank you.
I wasn't in Taiwan when they shot this, and I actually don't know the answer to that question. That does look almost exactly like Jia Chen. So, but I don't know the answer to that.
We have time for one more, maybe, over here.
Hi, I'm curious what when you were deciding to fade between shots versus just like cutting between them, were they signifying like acts in the movie, or what was the decision going into fading?
Generally, those kinds of things mean you're doing kind of what feels like a page turn, like either a time transition or some kind of emotional transition. It's not so much acts, but, you don't really overthink these things. You kind of do, this feels like the moment for a dissolve, And it is in transitional moments. It's where you're really going from what feels like one movement to another, or with a time transition or some kind of big shift. And you can use those things to indicate that. And some films have a lot of fades. I've done a bunch of films with no fades at all. So it just, what feels right for the material.
There is something very distinct and beautiful about the way you guys use crossfades. We showed Taking Woodstock earlier today, and there's a scene where Dimitri Martin's sort of putting blankets over his parents, and it's so beautiful.
I worked hard on that one because the camera had moved. We had to align everything and patch the pieces. It was actually very complicated to do that. But that, again, it feels right emotionally. You edit for a while and you learn some tricks, and you go, oh, I could try this trick here, and I did, and that worked really nicely. So, I was very happy with that particular moment in Taking Woodstock, and there's a kind of film language that you learn, that both audiences learn and filmmakers learn, and you use those things when they'll be effective.
To kind of, zoom out a little bit, and on that note, as you work with a director, and Ang Lee in particular, over the years, how does that relationship develop? Do you start to develop a shorthand? Do you start to really get into a rhythm of a way of working together? How do these conversations evolve over the years?
Yeah, you have to figure out, when you're on set shooting a movie, there's lots of people, either dozens or hundreds, depending on the movie. And there's a first assistant directors and producers there cracking the whip, and there's you have a thing you have to work through each day, and you know what it is, and you're on a schedule. And there's a whole hierarchy of procedures. In the editing room, it's just the two of you. You can sit and tell jokes all day. It doesn't, nobody's cracking the whip. So you have to figure out a way to structure your day. And different directors are different, and different projects are different. So Ang had never worked with another editor before pushing hands. So we kind of had to figure it out. And I was new at this. I had cut a bunch of not things besides features and one feature at that point. But you have to kind of work out how you're going to plan your day, how you're going to get through the amount of work you have to do. But again, it's much less structured. You can spend all day on one cut. You can do anything you want. So you need to be more disciplined. On set, the discipline is forced on you. But in post, you kind of have a schedule, and they'd like to stop paying you at some point, so you need to get done. But yeah, it's his first three films were partially or entirely in Mandarin. Then Sense and Sensibility was in English. So, it was, well, if he said take 4 is better than take 2 in Mandarin, I had to kind of believe it. But on Sense and Sensibility, if I said take 7 is better, that carried a little more weight. So, and that was Sense and Sensibility is the film we did right after that. In fact, there's a line in the kitchen scene where Judge Chen drops the plate. She says, Judge Chen said, "What do you know of my heart?" That's a line word for word out of Sense and Sensibility. Total coincidence. It was not, at the time, it wasn't known that he was going to be working on Sense and Sensibility. The people who hired, that script was already written. Just, it was, when I read the script, I was just floored. Like, this is, thematically, these movies are so similar. 3 sisters going through romantic things. It was, and big family things. So, yeah, it's, these kinds of themes keep coming up in Ang's movies.
That's a really beautiful synchronicity, and I think a really lovely note to wrap up on. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for giving me a reason to watch it again.